So I'm Luca. I'm the president of the student newspaper, and yeah, I've been in the role since September. Really enjoying it. It's a great opportunity for me to sit down with Peter today to talk about the university.
Yeah, I'm Amelie. I am a third-year English and history student, and I am deputy editor-in-chief at the Student at the moment, which I've been doing just this semester. So it's super exciting. Yeah, really excited to be here.
Good. Well, it's very nice to meet you both. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. So I'm Peter Mathieson. I'm the principal of the university, and very happy to talk about whatever subjects you want to cover.
Great. So I think we're just going to kick off. We'd just love to know a bit about you. How did you get here, sort of academically? What was your path into academia like?
Oh, I could easily take 30 minutes to tell you about that one. So I got to this kind of job by accident, really. I mean, I started off, my background was in medicine. I was very happy being a combined medical practitioner and teacher and researcher, which I did mostly in Bristol, a PhD in Cambridge, and then went to Bristol, spent 19 years in Bristol, and for about the first 7 or 8 of those years, rejoiced in having no administrative responsibility and just getting on with the things that I really wanted to do. And then became deputy head of department, then head of department, and then dean, and gradually sort of took more and more senior roles on. Went from there to the University of Hong Kong, where I was president for 4 years, and then came here in 2018 as the principal. So I've been here 8 years, almost exactly. And it was not really a conscious choice to go into this kind of job. It just sort of happened. And I wouldn't say I regret it, but there are things about my previous life that I miss. I mean, I miss medicine, I miss hospital. Never happier than when I'm in a hospital. I miss the teams that I worked with, both in the clinical care and in the lab. I still do a bit of teaching. I teach the medical students occasionally here and enjoy that, and teaching a subject that I've been able to keep up to date in. So it was not a conscious choice. I try to continue to think as a physician, so I try and think in kind of diagnostic and therapeutic terms. And I don't think I'll ever stop thinking like a medic, but I've stopped being an active medic for 12 years now.
Great, thank you.
Would you say there's anything in particular that attracted you to Edinburgh, this university, and anything you feel particularly proud about this university?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about that subject. And I mean, the honest answer is a very personal thing, which is that when I was first approached about the job, I said I wasn't interested because I already had a job. I was in Hong Kong and I had plenty of work still to do there. Although I was on a contract, and I don't know whether that contract would have been renewed because Hong Kong was a very political place. But the moment that seized me in terms of deciding to try and get this job was when I visited the city, because I was encouraged by the headhunter to visit. And my father was born in Edinburgh and left school at 14 to go to sea, was not an educated man. But the fact that I might be leading the university in his hometown meant a lot to me sentimentally. So that was a real hook. And also Edinburgh's just, when you come here, it's just so magnificent. The buildings are great, the history's fantastic. So I decided I would put my hat into the ring, and then when I've put myself into a contest, I'm going to try and win. So I worked very hard to try and get them to give me the job, and I'm very pleased to say they did.
Is there anything you've done since sort of being principal that you are particularly proud of at this uni? What do you consider your greatest achievements?
Yeah, it's a tough question because, I mean, it's been a challenging period, and you could easily, I'm more likely to come up with a list of negatives than I am a list of positives, to be honest. That's my kind of personality. So there have been some really difficult things, COVID, obviously, industrial action, financial challenge, all the rest of it has been difficult. So I'm pleased and proud that I've managed to assemble a very good team that's been able to lead the university through very complicated times. I think that is an achievement. I'm very pleased with some individual things. So I think we have genuinely invested in the student experience. We've created things like the nucleus at King's Buildings and the Wellbeing Centre and TVA, which is about to open. So I think we've really put our money where our mouth is in terms of investing in our student experience. I think it needed investment, and I'm proud that we've done that. There have been some individual achievements, things that not achieved by me, but achieved during my time, things like the award of the UK's national supercomputer. That was an interesting, for a student of politics, that was a very interesting saga where I had to deal with the changeover of government in Westminster, where one government had made a certain promise and the other government then said they weren't going to honour it. That got me involved in sort of political diplomacy that I'm not particularly skilled at. And I had to be patient, which I'm not terribly good at either. So that was a triumph when that eventually was awarded. I think it was the right decision. Edinburgh is the right place to do that. Things like the awards that we've won. We've just won a Queen Elizabeth Prize for Education. These are awarded every 2 years. and our work in fire safety, which is a really fantastic example of Edinburgh's prowess, has been awarded the Queen Elizabeth Prize. So again, it's nothing to do with me really, it's just the university. But there are things that have happened whilst I've been here that I'm very proud of, and I think this is a fabulous place and will continue to be a fabulous place, but has to survive some really quite challenging times right now.
You mentioned sort of political machinations. Obviously, higher education is a hugely contested arena, and questions about how funding works going forward, the status of foreign students. And there was a comment that Rachel Reeves made that got quite a lot of coverage in the past week, saying that the rest of society shouldn't foot the bill for higher education. I just wanted to know your thoughts on that and the political impact on the sector in general.
I mean, I am very pleased that the funding of higher education is now a political topic, because I've lived through several elections where it was not, where it was just not seen as a priority, either by the politicians or in turn by the public. And obviously politicians, by the nature of their job, have to take notice of the political views of the public, because they're the voters that will determine whether they get into office or not. And so the fact that it's now a topic, not just in Scotland, I mean, it's a topic in Scotland, I think, largely because of what's happened at the University of Dundee, but I do think it's been a topic for some time anyway, and I've obviously been speaking out about it because I have views on the future and on the importance of universities to Scotland. So it's going to be a topic in the upcoming Holyrood election, and it wasn't the case in the previous elections that I was here for. And I think, given what's going on in England, and with comments like the one that Rachel Reeves made, it looks likely to be a political hot topic in England as well. And I personally think that's a good thing, because I think universities should be a political and public priority, and they haven't been for many years.
So with a view to the Holyrood elections in May, is there anything you'd like to see from political parties on this higher education funding topic? What would you like to see from them?
So there's one thing I've already seen, which I'm very pleased about and I've welcomed, which is that a piece of work has been started by University Scotland in collaboration with the government, but also the other political parties. So it's a cross-party piece of work to do three things, basically. One is to quantify the scale of the challenge. One is to understand what the university sector itself can do to meet that challenge, and there's things like shared services or whatever else we could think about. And then the third thing is to look at the way other countries and other jurisdictions do the funding of higher education and see is there anything else that could be learned that might be applied to Scotland. Those three things, and particularly the first one, which is to quantify the scale of the problem, is very welcome. It could easily have been delayed until after the election, and the parties could have said, it was too difficult, politically very challenging. No one's going to vote for putting more money into the system, so therefore let's wait until after the election. And I argued that was not the right approach, because that would have cost us 2 years. So the fact that debate's happened already, or starting to happen, I very much welcome. Now, it has been criticised. The Times Higher published an article criticising it, saying that the government's just kicking the issue into the long grass so that they don't have to talk about it this side of the election. I don't actually accept that. I think the fact that they're talking about it and the fact that they've admitted there's a problem is very significant. So I'm pleased about that. What I would like to see in terms of an outcome, whoever forms the next government, is that they give political priority to the sustainability of universities, because I think that universities are one of Scotland's jewel in its crown, and they are threatened by the current structures, and therefore they need to be taken seriously as needing action.
You were talking on Scotcast last week about how maybe Scottish students could make a contribution to their undergraduate education. I know you've spoken before about education not always being accessible, and possibly for you, I think you told the student last year you weren't sure you would have been able to afford tuition fees, which is something that I can understand and relate to. What does that look like?
So I think that has been picked up, that particular suggestion, and I made very clear in that interview, and I always make very clear that I'm not necessarily an advocate of tuition fees, and part of the reason for that is because of my own experience. I mean, it's true that my mum had no money, so my dad died when I was young, my mum had no money. I don't think I would have probably gone to university had I had to find money. I got a local authority grant to go to university, and in those days there were no tuition fees. So it is partly based on my own experience, but it's also based on observations of the way systems of funding work. I mean, the system in England is not exactly without its controversies right now. So, but what I genuinely believe is that the current system is not sustainable, and so something has to change. And if the government, the Scottish government, the next government wants to continue with a policy of what they call free tuition, and I resent that term because it's not free, it's paid for by taxpayers. If they want to maintain a taxpayer-funded system, that's fine. We can live within that system, but they need to put more money in, or they need to change the number of places that they fund. Those are, the current system of an inadequate funding for a large number of places is not sustainable. So that something's got to change, and it's not up to me what the change is. One option is tuition fees. One option is a graduate contribution of some sort. Another option is that the government makes it a bigger priority and puts more money into it. Those are political choices that the next government will have to make. But my point is that doing nothing is not an option.
Just in terms of, obviously these are huge decisions with a number of ramifications, and decisions that will come with payoffs in certain areas. So you might prioritise one aspect of university life or one aspect of the university sector to possibly to the detriment of another. What does that mean in practice for you? Like, how are these decisions going to be made? Is that process going to work? And do you think the university has a role in advising government in that?
So yes, I do. I mean, I partly because of my medical background, but just because of my beliefs in general, I think people with experience and expertise should shape policy. I think they should be listened to. No one can say I'm not experienced. I mean, people may not agree with me, but I've been around for quite a long time. I'm towards the end of my career rather than at the start of it, and I think I've got views which I'm happy to explain as to why I think something needs to be changed. And I think the governments should listen to people. I'm not saying they need to agree with me. They may not agree with me. But at least I've got a viewpoint that is, I think, worthy of being expressed. Largely because I really care about universities and their future. And this place is 440 years old. We need to be taking steps to try and make sure that it's here for another 440 years, doing all the amazing things that it's done in its history. And I think the University of Edinburgh will survive no matter what happens, actually, because I think the University of Edinburgh is more or less in command of its own destiny. But other universities with less international reach and less kind of scope are in danger, and that's beautifully illustrated by Dundee. So I do think that action needs to be taken. I do think that universities have a role in trying to shape that policy. And although the things I've been saying and writing for the last 3 or 4 years are not necessarily popular, I'm doing it from a standpoint of saying I care about this sector, I think it's in danger, and I think Scotland would do well to look after it.
Just to bring you up quickly on something, you spoke about being in charge of its own destiny. How do you feel the decisions you've made in terms of staff numbers, infrastructure projects, how do you feel that's impacted the university's future?
So, I can honestly say that, and I should say, by the way, that I don't want to give you my opinions all the time. I'd like to hear some of yours. But the decisions that I and my senior team have made in the time that I've been here have always been founded on what we believe to be in the best interest of the university, and I absolutely believe that and stand by it. I don't think there are personal agendas or people trying to create legacies for themselves, neither for me nor for anybody else. I think we've been faced with sets of choices. One of the controversies is around the money that we've spent on buildings, the capital programme. Now, I would argue that all buildings are built for the people that will occupy them. The buildings are not built for their own sake. So things like the nucleus is a good example at King's Buildings. There was a problem at King's Buildings. It was felt to be a site with no soul. People would go there for classes or labs or something and then leave. There was no kind of community sense there. And I think we listened to that. We decided that there was a solution, which was the creation of the nucleus. And I think everyone agrees that that's been a really substantial change for the feel of King's Buildings. So we've listened, and where we've thought we can afford a project, we've been able to do it. Those affordability decisions were made 10 years ago. So the current situation, if I was now told that we needed a new building at King's Buildings, we'd have a real struggle to be able to afford it, because right now just paying the bills and keeping the show on the road is a challenge. And so we need to get back to a position where we can invest in our future, and that's one of the reasons why we've made the decisions that we have. In terms of the staff base, and obviously one of the current anxieties that the staff of the university have is, we've talked about reducing the number of staff posts that we have. And we're trying to do so by voluntary means rather than by compulsory means, and that's very much a genuine commitment. But the reality is the staff of the university has grown by about 2,500 in the last 3 or 4 years. It happened after the pandemic. It's happened in all sorts of organisations. Most universities have seen it. Most other public sector companies have seen it. And it was a kind of reaction to the pandemic. And we had to put a stop to that because we couldn't afford it. So the change we made now, almost 2 years ago, was to limit recruitment of new staff, because we didn't want to add more to a staff base that was already beyond what we could afford. And we're now facing the reality that in order to make ourselves sustainable again, we do need to reduce our expenditure, not just on staff, but 60% of our expenditure is on staff. So if we don't look at staff costs, we're only looking at 40% of our expenditure. So we can look at all those things as well, but we have to look at the staff costs. And the statistic I've quoted is that it costs £120 million a month to pay the bills here, to run the university. So 60% of that is staff, 40% is other expenses. We've got to reduce that because we can't afford it.
I think when we talk about like staffing costs, a lot of the things that often comes up is your salary. I'd be interested to know, maybe this is a bit of a cheap question, but in the committee last year, you weren't able to name your salary. Do you know it now?
Well, you'll understand that I answered my questions at that committee honestly, and I genuinely did not know. And I also knew that he had the figures in front of him, so he wasn't asking me for information that he didn't already know. I do know the figure because I went home and looked at my P60 after that, and in my last P60 the figure was 404,000, and I paid 186,000 of tax on that. So one way of looking at it is that yes, I'm very well paid. I accept that. I've never disputed that. But I also pay a very high tax contribution from that. So, and that's a good thing. I mean, I think people who are well paid should pay high taxes. It's a kind of political ideology of mine. I think it's right that's the case. So yes, I do know the numbers, but I honestly was not trying to hide anything at that committee. I honestly, I knew he'd got the number in front of him. I didn't want to get into an argument about whether it's 404 or 410. I mean, he quoted a higher figure, but it's immaterial. It's a high salary. I know that.
So we were looking, obviously, into salaries. I think the deficit, we're not in a deficit, but the figure that would make us into a surplus is £5.7 million. 11 people in senior leadership team's salary, it would add up to £2.5 million. Obviously, we're not expecting that none of you get paid anything, but that is quite a significant amount. That is about half of what would take us into a surplus. Do you feel that the increases in your salary continually are right, or are like in a place where, you know, the university is in a financially difficult situation? Is that something that you feel is fair?
So it's a topic of conversation every year. There's a thing called the Remuneration Committee, which is a committee of the court, of the governing body, and the Remuneration Committee sets my salary and sets the salary of the senior team. And there's always a debate about senior pay and whether or not we should be either taking pay cuts or not taking a rise. For the first, I think, 4 years I was here, I didn't take any pay rises because I felt that I was already very well paid, and it was right that I didn't take a pay rise. The Remuneration Committee were never particularly happy about that because they don't want to see any kind of disincentives to future recruits. It is important that a place like Edinburgh recruits high quality people, not just to the principal role, but to all the senior roles. And there is a recognition that this is a big organisation with complex needs, and in order to attract high quality staff, you need to pay competitive salaries. I understand the debate about what does that mean, and is it right to add a pay rise on top of what's already a high salary? There's never been a time when I've taken any pay rise which is higher than anybody else has taken in percentage terms. And as I say, in several years, I've not taken a pay rise at all. We have had a debate recently about the current context and whether it would be right for... we've actually talked not just about the senior team, but we've talked about this thing called grade 10. So you'll know that grade 10 is the most senior grades, mostly of academic staff, but also of some professional services staff. And all the senior team are part of grade 10, but so are loads of other people. And amongst our grade 10 population, there's been massive growth in the last couple of years, partly through promotions, but also through hiring. And the question has been raised of should we say to all of our grade 10 staff, we don't think you should get a pay rise in the current context. Now, under the law, they are entitled to a pay rise, so they'd have to volunteer. The senior team is the only people for whom it's not automatic. So there is a question of should we ask all well-paid people right across the university, including me and including the senior team, to not take a pay rise or indeed to take a pay cut. And the only precedent we have for that is during the pandemic when, again, because of financial uncertainty in the early start of the pandemic, I took a pay cut, the senior team, other members of the senior team took a pay cut, and we invited grade 10 to volunteer, and I think we had one volunteer out of the hundreds of staff. So people don't necessarily rush forward when it's their salary that's being suggested.
I just think, because we're talking obviously about huge financial decisions with huge implications, there are tough decisions to be made, and there are payoffs from certain areas. When so many staff are being made redundant, when students we've spoken to are talking about a tangible impact on the quality of their teaching as a result, do you not feel that the decisions are all impacting a certain group and not the other group?
I can see the argument. I mean, the honest answer, so your figure of whatever it was, 5.7 million to put us into surplus, is not a figure I would accept. I mean, we've talked about 140 million. You know, we've talked about needing to take 140 million out of our annual expenditure in order to restore the finances of the university. So the scale is very much bigger. If I genuinely thought that me taking a pay cut or the senior team taking a pay cut would make any material difference to the financial sustainability of the university, then that would put it on a different kind of level. The reality is it would be a gesture. I understand why people think that gesture should be made. The decision's actually not up to me. It's actually up to the Remuneration Committee. But the argument that would solve the problem is just false. The argument that we have 140 million to find, and it's 120 million a month to pay the bills. So we need to trim that. And trimming the senior team salaries, even if the senior team worked for nothing, would do almost nothing to materially contribute to the sustainability.
I'm just going to go back to these figures quickly because this is from the Joint Union's report on the financial report that the university put out. So the expenditure increase is 3.4%. The growth is 3%, and that's without the proposed cuts. And that 0.4% amounts to 5.7 million. The 11 senior leadership team members' pay is 2.5 million. So if that's the figure that's important, that would make a tangible difference.
So would you advocate not paying the senior team anything?
No, but I'm saying there are huge cuts going on elsewhere. People are being made redundant. There's a lack of clarity about who's being made redundant. There's a lack of clarity within the staff. The offer was accepted to end the strikes, but there are vagaries. The staff vote was very inconclusive. There's a lack of confidence amongst the staff, and obviously, you should be paid. The senior leadership team needs to be paid, but again, these are payoffs that are hitting one part and not the other.
No, I understand that, and I'm very concerned that there are students that feel that their educational experience will be impacted by the financial situation. We're doing everything we can to try and avoid that being the case. So the ways we're looking at reshaping the staff base and reshaping the offer are all designed to not only preserve the student experience, but actually to enhance it. And there are genuine reasons for thinking that we can actually make the student experience better as part of the work that we're doing. So that's very much a motivation. In terms of the union's interpretation of the annual report and accounts, I mean, we would dispute a lot of their interpretations. The way they've interpreted it is not in line with the way we think or the governing body thinks it should be interpreted. The gap that needs to be closed is much bigger than would be affected by an impact on senior pay, unless you did it right across grade 10. That, because there's so many people in grade 10, that would make a significant difference, but that's pretty unlikely to happen.
I think just with this idea of like student experience changing or increasing, obviously the student satisfaction rate is historically low at Edinburgh. We know this. I think the most recent figure was about 73%, which ranked us at 128 out of 130, which isn't great. I know personally one of my tutors is in HCA considered as a great teacher. Pretty much across the board, anyone I know who's been taught by him has called him the best teacher they've ever had. He's been nominated over 30 times for like Teacher of the Year in 2 years. He's fantastic. I was actually sent a sort of form last night about how great he was because he was on a fixed term contract and it's not being renewed next year. So he's been made redundant, essentially. Students were sending around this form last night trying to appeal it. It said on it There's a sense that such a teacher is increasingly a rarity in higher education. He's been a model of what we feel the university experience would ideally entail. I'm not sure that making teachers like this redundant is proof of changing or improving student experience.
No, and I can see, very much see that case. And I mean, obviously, I won't talk about individual members of staff, but if there are people that are performing to a high level, whether it's in teaching or whether it's in research or whether it's in something else, we definitely need to try and find mechanisms whereby we can keep those people. We want to identify the people that are making major contributions to the university. The reality is that there are some people who are making less significant contributions to the university. That's true in all big organisations. And one of the things that we're seeking to do, and it's not a decision that can be made by me because I don't know the individuals, but at school level or at programme level, we're trying to identify the major contributors, and we're trying to protect them. The whole subject of fixed-term contracts is a subject in itself. I mean, we rely a lot on guaranteed hours staff and on fixed-term contracts, and there's fragility of employment in the sector, which only gets worse in periods of financial insecurity. So I think that's a kind of working employment conditions subject, which also needs attention. But keeping people that are contributing in the way that it sounds like that teacher is doing, employed either in this university or in some other university, should be a priority for people that are making those decisions.
But in terms of ensuring those people are still in employment, we've got hold of an internally circulated report saying that the performance of lecturers was not considered. I think it was the performance of tutors. It was more to do with...
tutor performance was based on the amount of hours taught, not about, explicitly not. There was a line which said it's not about student performance or student opinion or feedback.
So there is a piece of work that's ongoing, it's not yet finished, which is called the Academic Contribution Framework, and it's designed to look at the contribution that individuals make to the university's mission, however defined. Obviously, the university's mission includes teaching, research, citizenship, various other things, leadership. And there are metrics in that system which have been debated at great length with the trade unions and with staff members, with SEN and various other people. And it's true that contact hours is a kind of easy thing to measure because that's something that's measurable. But we also need to measure quality. And there is a mechanism in that piece of work, which I say is not yet finalised, that would allow assessment of quality, including student feedback, the kind of things you referred to, including other metrics of achievement, whether you're talking about research or teaching. There's a danger that we only measure the things which are easy to measure instead of the things we'd really like to measure. And the kind of unsolicited feedback that particular teacher has received should be significant. And I mean, I would suggest communicating it to the relevant head of school or head of programme.
I think the point we're trying to get at is there have been a lot of... So, for example, with the infrastructure projects, I think the feeling amongst students and certainly amongst staff as well is that this is perhaps not having a tangible impact on the quality of teaching. And I can speak for myself. I don't think the Futures Institute, for instance, has had any tangible impact on improving the quality of teaching. I don't think anyone particularly felt Teviot needed an update from the students I've spoken to, at least. And obviously that capital spending has contributed to the university needing to save money, particularly with the depreciation on top of it. I think there's a feeling that this is sort of window dressing in replacement of actual teaching quality. So, as you'd expect, I don't agree with that. I mean, I think you walk around the Futures Institute, you see dozens of students in there studying. The study spaces are very well. We're short of study spaces. I think that's been very welcomed by students, certainly by evidence of voting with their feet and using it. Teviot needed to be refurbished largely because of reasons of access and safety. So it was an old building. It didn't have good disabled access. It wasn't considered safe in terms of fire safety and evacuation and whatnot. So there was a kind of health and safety imperative that said that needed to be renovated. It's not being done as a vanity project. It's been done to improve the experience that people have using it. The other point I'd make, and this is a point of dispute with the trade unions, is that the problems of the University of Edinburgh, the financial challenges that we face, are not explained by the money we've spent on our estate. Of course, we have to find that money, so we have to generate cash in order to spend on repairs. We're 400 years old. We've got 500 buildings. Many of them are old. Many of them are unsuitable in terms of climate sustainability and in terms of heating and lighting. So there's a mandatory spend on both safety and on
maintenance that we can't avoid. If we don't spend, and we are having to cut back our spending because of the current situation, we've cut back radically. But if we do that for very long, we're just storing up a problem for the future, because these buildings will fall down and will become uninhabitable. And that's not good for future students and staff. So I refute the idea that these are just window dressing. I mean, we're doing responsible things to try and improve the environment in which our students and staff live and work.
I still think there is an impression. I think there's also a lack of, from the staff we spoke to, there's a lack of clarity about the direction the university is going in, particularly regarding the estates projects, and the idea that the university is, rather than prioritising student experience and the students already there, prioritising potential students. And I suppose that comes back to a broader point about the marketisation of university, but that's the accusation and the impression we get from a lot of staff.
Yeah, and I've heard that impression from comments that have been made to me directly. And I mean, I do understand that view, but we also, it's responsible leadership to think about the future. So, we're keen on making the experience for our current students and staff as good as it can be, but we also have to think about the longer term, so that people like you in generations to come can still benefit from everything that the University of Edinburgh can offer. And if the estate is falling apart and we're not renovating buildings that are dangerous or inaccessible, we're not being responsible to the future. So we are trying to think both in terms of current terms and the future. It's quite true. They are future students. But this is not, again, because of some sort of vanity. This is because that's the responsible thing to do when you're leading one of the world's great universities. You have relayed opinion that you've heard from students outside the library and also from staff and whatnot. I mean, what things do you think you'd like to say to me and I can relay to my senior team that you haven't already had a chance to do?
I think more from the staff perspective. They feel there's a lack of communication between the leadership and the staff. They feel unsure about the direction of the university in light of the estates projects, but also the sort of focus on teaching quality, which we've already spoken about. There were vagaries in the offer about no future commitments to no redundancies going forward. It was sort of postponing rather than avoiding redundancies, which was unsatisfactory for a lot of staff. The situation for PhD students, the sort of unsure middle ground they occupy within the university, and a general lack of satisfaction for them. I think a lot of the teaching staff are very disappointed about the state of the university and about the future direction of the university.
I think if I could jump in from a student perspective as well, I think there's a feeling that the university doesn't necessarily care about individual students. There's a sense that maybe some students are being used as, I think a phrase was, cash cows. And there's just a general sense teaching hours are down, maybe course options are down, especially on the humanities side. It didn't necessarily exist as much in sort of medics and things, but there was a sense from humanities students particularly that they weren't really getting their money's worth, or that the university was much more focused on making a profit and, like Luca says, maybe appealing to potential new students rather than focusing on the issues at hand. Teaching issues.
So thank you, and I hear those things, and I think we should listen to those opinions. The reality is that we have to try and do both. We have to try and think about current students and staff and future students and staff. That's part of the responsibility that I and others took on when we take on these leadership roles. We can't just think about the short term. We have to think longer term. That's a challenge, but we need to do that, and we need to get the balance right. In terms of caring about students, I mean, I can absolutely tell you that I and every member of my senior team, believe it or not, really do care about our students and staff. I know people don't always think that we do. We make decisions not for ourselves or our self-aggrandizement. We make decisions because we think they're best for the university. And the university is the sum of its people. So thinking of its current students and its future students, thinking of its current staff and its future staff absolutely drives all of our decision-making. And we have to sometimes make unpopular decisions because we believe they're best. And we have to try and communicate them. There hasn't been any lack of communication, but we recognise that the messages that we've been giving are not popular, and people don't necessarily want to receive unpopular messages.
One staff member I spoke particularly about the lack of communication. I think there was a large meeting with yourself and a couple of other members of the senior leadership team, and that was basically the only in-person communication he's had about the issues.
Well, there have been lots. If that person didn't come to the others, that's up to them, but there have been lots of meetings. So thank you very much. Thanks, Luca and Amelie, for taking the time to come and talk. Thank you for raising issues which are important and need to be discussed. And I'm very happy to hear from you about some of the opinions you've collected, and I will convey them back to my team.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.